You're listening to the Fort Erie Podcast, your local source for upcoming events, hot new listings, and bite-sized interviews with business and community leaders. Here's your host, Brent Jones.
Good morning, Fort Erie. You're listening to a special update episode of the Fort Erie Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Jones, and it is Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. And normally this time of year, this is right around the time when I'd begin promoting season 4. Be like, hey, there's a brand new season of the podcast coming soon. Traditionally, that's how I've done it. I've had kind of a spring season, late winter into spring, and then I've done a fall season kind of, mid-fall into winter. That's kind of how I like to structure the rollout of new episodes of this show. But I made the decision last week to postpone season 4 of the Fort Erie Podcast, kind of indefinitely. And there's a number of reasons for it. Chief among them is that the main segments, the stuff that makes the Fort Erie Podcast, a lot of it is very difficult to cover right now, thanks in no small part to the pandemic, especially the stay-at-home orders that are currently in effect. For example, a core piece of the show, ever since I first created it, has been to cover local community events. Because as I've always said, there were so many great things happening in our town. But right now, there's not an option for a lot of community events to be going on. So it's very difficult to cover the community events that don't exist. I've always liked to keep the show positive and to focus on good news. And so a segment about local news headlines, a lot of the news right now is dominated by new COVID cases, hospitalizations. The prime sort of piece, the meat and potatoes of every episode, has been talking with local business owners. And in talking with local business owners, it's very difficult for them to talk about their business, what makes their business great, when they're closed down at the moment or they're operating at limited capacity, covering questions that I see in the Fort Erie Questions and Answers Facebook group. The questions largely are related to what is open right now, what isn't. Again, not a lot of that sort of enriching, sort of nourishing local content that I've always, made a focus of the show. Even a little segment like hot new listings. I mean, inventory new listings right now on the real estate market are in such short supply compared to such high demand for them that virtually every new listing that hits the market right now is a hot new listing. Great time to be a seller, challenging time to be a buyer. This is essentially what happened while recording and producing seasons 2 and seasons 3 of the show, is that I'd start out the season with a great plan for here's what to expect coming up this season. And by about the halfway point, I had to completely shift gears and start removing some of this content. And I don't like doing that for something that is supposed to be a short, insightful, meaningful 15-minute episode. A lot of the content just wasn't there. And so the way I see it, in order to make the Fort Erie Podcast as great as it can be, there's really only 2 ways that I could proceed with doing season 4. The first is to totally change the format of the show. And I have no idea what that would look like, folks. I don't know. I would have to make it less topical, less current. So some of the previous segments that I've included, like This Month in Fort Erie History, it would have to be a lot of looking back, potentially, as opposed to looking to the present or looking forward. I don't know. I don't know what that would look like to change the format. The other option that I have is, we can just wait it out. Let's let restrictions loosen a little bit. I mean, I'm not talking about things going back 100% to normal, because we're still, I think, a little ways out from that. But if we could start to get back to some degree of sort of normal everyday life, then I think it would be possible to come back to the format that I've been using for the Fort Erie Podcast for the past year and a half or so. And I'm really leaning towards the latter option, because the goal, as I've always stated from day one, has been to create an online show that focuses on what's good in Greater Fort Erie. And I really thought that I owed it to you, dear listener, to explain why nothing has been announced and absolutely nothing is in the works at the moment for season 4. So all I can ask is to please be patient. In the meantime, stay tuned, subscribe to the Fort Erie Podcast wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. That could be Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever, whatever, so that when a new episode is finally released, you get notified about it. And be sure to follow me on social media because I post regular updates about the Fort Erie Podcast when there's a season in progress. So I'm at Buy with Brent, BUY with Brent on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can even subscribe to my email newsletter by visiting theforteriepodcast.com. Just click the link at the top of the page that says giveaway. Basically, as a thank you for subscribing to receive email updates from me, you'll automatically be entered into a draw this February to win one of 2 gift cards. If you live in the Port Colborne area, I'm giving away a $50 gift card to the Saucy Pot. And if you live in Greater Fort Erie, which most of you listeners do, of course, I'm giving away $50 to the Barrel, always a favorite. So, of course, if you have suggestions for people or things that you'd like to hear about or see featured coming up in season 4 of the Fort Erie Podcast, even if you have suggestions for how I might restructure the show to make it a little more feasible right now, visit theforteriepodcast.com and click contact at the top of the page. And as always, folks, stay safe out there, stay healthy. We will get through this together, and I look forward to having a brand new episode of the Fort Erie Podcast available for you soon.
You've been listening to the Fort Erie Podcast with your host, Brent Jones, a sales representative with RE/MAX Niagara Realty Limited Brokerage. Follow at Buy with Brent on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates. Subscribe to the Fort Erie Podcast on popular platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and catch a new bite-sized episode every week. Until next time.